Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. This week marks 75 years since the outbreak of the Korean War, an inflection point that holds deep resonance here on the peninsula. As President Lee Jae Myung begins his term, he's taking visible steps to reset tone with North Korea, halting propaganda broadcasts and re-emphasizing past military agreements. But still, challenges remain. Pyongyang has officially labeled the South as an enemy state and severed all remaining ties. And at the same time, the U.S. has launched a precision strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, leading to a full ceasefire with Israel. Now, that sequence is already reshaping strategic assumptions worldwide. So tonight we ask, what room is there for trust and diplomacy at this point? For more on this, we are joined in the studio by Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Welcome to the program.
Good evening.
And also joining us online is Brian Myers, Professor of International Studies at Tongsan University. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you.
So let's begin a discussion with Dr. Go. Like we've mentioned, it's 75 years already since Korean War happened, and President Lee Jae Myung has been ramping up conciliatory gestures towards North Korea, like halting loudspeaker broadcasts. Do you think these kinds of actions actually could become a turning point for inter-Korean relations?
Well, on the surface, we know that the North Koreans have reciprocated this positive gesture on the part of President Lee of halting the loudspeaker campaign on the part of South Korea, which was reciprocated by the North Koreans by their own stopping of the loudspeaker, essentially loudspeaker campaign that they also have on the northern side, and apparently North Koreans have also stopped sending the so-called trash balloons to the south. So this has given hope that the North Korea and South Korea may perhaps take a tentative steps towards restoring inter-Korean relations that have been essentially very much at the bottom for the last 2 years of the President Yoon's administration. But on the other hand, there are macro factors here that could possibly prevent essentially an expansion of this, also extension of this positive gesture that we are seeing in the first days of the President Lee's administration. What I mean by this is in fact what you just mentioned at the intro to this program, which is the fact that North Korea now considers South Korea to be an enemy state. And this has a profound ideological and political implications on the part of North Korea. So what it means is North Korea is going to view not just South Korea, but also the United States primarily as targets of North Korea's military deterrence. So at the same time, they have essentially given up efforts to conduct diplomacy. So this is a long-term policy line on the part of North Korea. So it's unlikely to be changed. Just because South Korea stopped using the loudspeakers to essentially conduct information campaign against the North. So I think it will remain to be seen, and it will also depend on what kind of policy measures President Lee is going to announce in the coming days regarding North Korea and the unification.
Right. So though it's a positive opening move, there's still a lot of challenges remaining.
Exactly.
Now, continuing from there, President Lee has consistently stressed restoring the September 19 military agreement since his candidacy. Professor Myers, can we expect some more concrete and forward-looking peace proposals from the Lee administration? And what measures are actually necessary to truly improve inter-Korean relations?
Well, the important thing, as I see it, is just steady, routine cooperation, even in regard to small things. And we're seeing a kind of cooperation along the DMZ already, of course, at least a shared commitment to reduce tensions there. And I think we can expect the Lee administration to keep trying to get things going. And small steps like this are a pretty good way to do it. I would call it more of a German-style approach than the traditional South Korean approach of trying to get every big things going with splashy summits that never really lead anywhere. But we shouldn't get our hopes up too much, because before Kim Jong-un agrees to drop all that enemy state talk that Dr. Go was just talking about, he's going to want to see signs that President Lee will do more than President Moon Jae-in did to push back against American pressure. And the problem is that this new president has much less room in which to maneuver than Moon Jae-in did, because the whole geopolitical situation is a lot more difficult now. North Korea is fighting with Russia against Ukraine, for one thing, and the US is trying to pivot away from NATO and toward Asia, and that can only mean more pressure on South Korea to be a good and loyal ally. So as I see it, the question is, can the two Koreas really improve relations even while the relationship between the United States and China gets worse? And I don't see how that can be done. And in bad economic times like now, the South Korean public is not going to want President Lee to risk offending Donald Trump too much. So while I hope and I think that working level communications between Seoul and Pyongyang can perhaps be restored, I don't see any big summits taking place, anything of that nature, until the Americans start talking with Kim Jong-un. I think that would have to come first.
Right, especially since a lot of things have changed since the Hanoi summit. We'll really have to see how things unfold. But speaking of challenges, Dr. Go, it's noteworthy that North Korea has unilaterally declared South Korea as an enemy state and severed all communication lines. What do you see as the most pressing challenge to bring peace on the Korean Peninsula right now?
Well, the controversial issue here is the North Korea's refusal to conduct dialogue with either Seoul or Washington about the policy of denuclearization that both governments for now hold on North Korea. In fact, the U.S. State Department just reaffirmed yesterday, I believe, that the U.S. policy towards North Korea is still about denuclearization. And this is something that the North Koreans are fighting with tooth and nail right now. They want to convince or essentially compel the rest of the world to accept it as a nuclear state. So there's a big gulf between Pyongyang and Washington and Seoul regarding this issue. So unless there's a fundamental change in this orientation, the policy orientation on the part of the United States towards North Korea, it's probably North Korea is going to stick to this current line of two hostile states doctrine. Again, the two hostile state doctrine, in fact, it's not only limited to South Korea, even though that's the main recipient of North Korea's aggressive policy. In between the lines, it's also clear that North Korea is targeting the U.S. policy of denuclearization. So essentially, North Koreans are holding this policy line of denuclearization as an attitude of hostility on the part of the United States. So that's going to be the fundamental issue between Washington and Seoul on one hand, and North Korea. And this is the reason why I think Professor Meyer is mentioning to change the attitude on the part of the United States. And I think it's something that the North Koreans are hoping to see in President Trump. President Trump has mentioned, made the right sound about perhaps recognizing North Korea as a nuclear armed state. And that's something that the North Koreans are looking forward to. But at the same time, the policy lines of his administration is very conservative, very orthodox in the sense that it's sticking very strongly to the policy of denuclearization. So we'll see how President Trump, after all the distractions that he's facing right now, not just in the Middle East but also in Ukraine, might turn around and approach North Korea with a new perspective, and that's what the North Koreans are waiting to see.
Right. So bottom line is recognizing North Korea as a nuclear state, whether we do it or not. Now, let's also turn to Pyongyang's latest moves. At the three-day Workers' Party plenary session from June 21st to 22nd, there was speculation that Kim Jong-un might have sent a message in response to U.S. and South Korean overtures, but his speech was kept entirely under wraps. Professor Myers, why do you think the North chose secrecy this time around?
Well, we can only speculate. Kim's speech may have been an angry one in which he scolded top officials for bad performance, and that wouldn't have been a very good context for a diplomatic message. Or he might not have wanted his speech to get buried overseas in all the news about Israel and Iran. Or he might not have wanted to respond too early to President Lee's overtures. After all, it was only last year that Kim made that big programmatic statement about not having any more interest in inter-Korean dialogue. So he would look unserious if he changed his tune the moment the new government came to power here. Now, all those considerations may have played a role, but remember, secrecy has really always been North Korea's default mode, and it's served the country very well over the years. And if you read the domestic propaganda in North Korea, the regime likes to congratulate itself on being a black hole to the outside world. That's the phrase that they always like using, a black hole. Now, Kim Jong-un has favored a bit more transparency than his father and his grandfather did, but the disastrous launch of that destroyer last March was such an embarrassment. He may well have concluded that it was time to make the country a bit more mysterious and unscrutable again.
Mm-hmm. Now, shifting gears, Dr. Go, following a U.S. strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, it was kind of unexpected for many. Washington announced that Iran and Israel have agreed to a full ceasefire lately. How do you think North Korea, which has consistently rejected President Trump's outreach, take this rapid sequence of airstrike to a ceasefire process?
First of all, I think North Koreans, Kim Jong-un in particular, probably seeing a confirmation of the nuclear line of his predecessors, his father and grandfather, of building nuclear capability at the expense of economic development. To have proven to be correct, for at least for the regime survival. Had North Korea not had nuclear deterrence in place, that's probably what Kim Jong-un is thinking right now, that North Korea could well have been the Iran today. So I think this is probably the confirmation of long held line of nuclearization. And I think what's going to happen now is that North Korea is going to essentially use this as a propaganda, domestic propaganda, telling the people of North Korea that all your sacrifices for building nuclear weapons have proven to be worthwhile now that Iran, without a nuclear deterrence, have been subject to very strong military campaign on the part of not just Israel, but also the United States. So I think, first of all, that's going to be what happened in Iran, as it's going to give propaganda value to the North Korean regime. And second is that the importance of keeping nuclear deterrence. And I think that one of the lessons that the North Koreans have picked up here is that the United States is not daring to attack North Korea with right now because North Korea has nuclear deterrence. But on the other hand, I think North Koreans probably realize that if they want to negotiate with the United States, they might have to, in fact, there's a ground for negotiation now because President Trump is also using diplomatic pressure along with the military campaign on parallel manner to change the Iranians' posture towards nuclear policy that they have. So probably North Korea believes that essentially Trump is going to try to reach out to them, but then emphasizing the diplomatic part of his leverages rather than the military part. But on the other hand, the central issue between the North Korea and the United States will always be about North Korea's nuclear capability. So I think for overall, I think North Korea is going to drive something useful about President Trump's approach towards the aspiring nuclear states. That I think North Korea is going to really reflect this on their possible diplomatic engagement in Washington in the near future.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of complex strategic calculation is in the play. Now, despite swiftly condemning America's strike, Pyongyang seemed to calibrate this language very carefully. Professor Myers, what might be the strategy behind North Korea's such kind of a measured response?
Well, remember, North Korea is already fighting against Ukraine, and that in itself is a big provocation from Washington's perspective. So it would be very risky, I think, for Kim Jong-un to provoke America even further by siding too vocally with Iran, because the Americans might well think, wait a minute, is this guy going to start sending soldiers and weapons to Iran as well? Now, Israel is a lot more important to the Americans than Ukraine is, and Kim knows this, so he needs to be careful. But let's keep a sense of perspective here. I mean, North Korea's statement was not all that different in tone from Russia's and China's. I think all three regimes expressed themselves quite carefully. Why? Because Xi, Putin, and Kim are all, I think, pragmatic leaders who put the interests of their own states above any foreign entanglements. Now, Kim is helping Russia out, sure, but for a very big payback, and not because of some moral or ideological commitment to helping Russia. So while the United States is ready to risk an awful lot on behalf of Israel, whether the American voters support that or not, North Korea is certainly not going to go out on a limb on behalf of faraway Iran.
Well, that's for North Korea, but let's also touch upon America's perspective, Dr. Go. So, though the situation could be different, do you think there's a chance for Washington to, potentially justify a preemptive strike on North Korean facilities like Yongbyon in the name of nuclear deterrence?
It's quite unlikely under the current presidency of Donald Trump. I think President Trump was subject to under tremendous pressure from his MAGA base because he had to decide to conduct very limited military campaign against Iran. So we have to remember that President Trump's one of his first speeches also about promising the American people that there will be no new wars under him. In fact, it's going to end wars under his watch. So engaging in North Korea in denuclearization military campaign of the aim of denuclearization, it will have to be massive. It's a massive scale operation because the chance of escalation from limited military campaign to a full-scale war in the Korean Peninsula is very high. Unlike Iran and Israel, they don't share a common border. They are separated by at least 1,000 kilometers of other countries' territories, whereas South Korea and North Korea essentially are joined at the hip. So in that sense, the escalation risk is huge here. So President Trump, if he wants to engage in, say, a limited focus precision strike campaign against North Korea's nuclear facilities, will have to prepare for potentially a full warfare against North Korea involving millions of soldiers. So that completely precludes the risk, the chance of using military means only to target North Korea. So we have to remember again that how the United States entered the air campaign against Iran. It was only because Israel had proven to the rest of the world that Iran had no effective air defense, and the leadership was in disarray, and the Iranian regime was completely penetrated by the Israeli intelligence. So those are the base conditions, which are very tough conditions to achieve for North Korea right now, that Israel had met, and that's only when the United States had decided to enter the fray, and even then it was a very limited in scope. So we don't see any of the conditions being met anytime soon in North Korea. So chance of a full-scale war in the Korean Peninsula is completely misplaced, in my view.
So a very different situation now. Then President Trump's latest strike actually signals a shift from diplomacy to force, a show of unpredictability in all. What kind of posture do you think North Korea will adopt going forward in its dealings with Washington, Professor Myers? Do you think they'll avoid or engage in dialogue?
Well, I don't think the strike on Iran is greatly going to change Kim Jong-un's position either way. The North Koreans know that Israel is a very special case. It wields enormous influence over American foreign policy. And this has actually been a very popular topic in North Korean propaganda for at least 30 years. Now, yes, Trump did strike Iran, but Kim Jong-un knows that Trump didn't really want to do it and that it was a very unpopular move with the MAGA base. And that's actually quite good news from the North's perspective. Also, and more importantly, of course, the Kim regime already has between 60 and 90 nuclear weapons, so Kim is not going to be quaking in fear right now. On the other hand, I think the strike may have brought home to the regime just how much Donald Trump has changed since his first term. This time he's not going to be playing around with Rocket Man jokes and that kind of thing. But then Kim Jong-un has changed as well. He's not even going to pretend to denuclearize anymore, and he's sure not going to rush into another summit and risk being humiliated again. But I think he has no reason not to let his people listen to Trump's people if the Americans do have a good proposal to make. And I think if Trump stops insisting on denuclearization and Kim does not insist on formal recognition of the North as a nuclear power, then I think in that gray room in between those two extreme positions, there is room for trust building and exchanges. But really, the war in Ukraine must end first, I believe, because I don't see how anything can improve until that happens.
All right, so we will have to keep close tabs on the situation moving forward. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion here at this point, but thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and for your insights. Dr. Go, of course.
My pleasure.
And Professor Myers, we appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot.
And that's all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.